Good morning. I apologize for the look of this, but I haven't figured out a better way to do it. So,
Good morning to everyone. I'm Tim Bardick, and I'm here, or virtually here, as a member of the Sunday Services Committee. And I'd like to welcome all of you to this People's Church service. A special welcome to anyone who happens to be visiting this Zoom service. We hope it helps bring some words of hope into your lives. People's Church is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association. We're part of a long tradition of liberal religion. Among other things, liberal religion means that we believe we are called to do what is necessary to build a better future in this life, in this world. To quote the civil rights pioneer John Lewis, who died Friday, quote, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Let us," unquote. Let us find the courage in our community to rise towards John Lewis's call. Let us be resilient and have faith in a better world that is yet to be. Two announcements before we start the service. First, the memorial service for Druzy Rosegrant will be happening on Zoom at 1 p.m. today. For that service, we'll be using the same link and meeting ID as for this service. Second, next Sunday, July 26th, Reverend Rachel will be doing a question box style service. She encourages people to send her questions about our church, religion, morality, etc. during the week, or bring them to the service next Sunday. So we'll introduce our speaker today. Our speaker today is Hilary Hunt, who wants to say that she was honored to grow up at People's Church and be nurtured by this community throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. Hilary is originally from Kalamazoo and recently returned home in 2018 after spending some years in other parts of this country, where her path has taken her through environmental justice spaces, natural lands management, and various environmental nonprofit adventures. Today, she speaks as a land protector and currently works at the Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy. So our welcome to Hilary, who we will hear from a bit later in the service. And now I'll turn it over to Savannah, who will lead us in our opening song.
Good morning. As always, I invite you to find a comfortable singing position if you're singing along. Some position where you can breathe easily. Here we go.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May
For our chalice lighting, these words. We come together every week, bound not by a creed or a mutual desire to please one God or many gods. Yet we are drawn together by a belief that how we are in the world, who we are together, matters. We light this chalice together in the knowledge that love, not fear, can change this world. So now one of our traditions at People's Church is that we set aside some time each Sunday for people to share joys and concerns, joys and sorrows they have. Let me pause the recording, which I need to remember to do. Okay. So I'd like, People's Church depends on its members now, perhaps more than ever, for many different roles, like being willing to speak at a summer service. And one thing we also depend on is it takes some monetary resources to run the church. So I invite you, if you're able and willing, to give some financial offering to People's Church. In the chat box, there's a link to how you can do that. And while you're doing that, Savannah will do will play us a song, Rising Green.
My blood doth rise in the roots of yon oak. Her sap doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars
I'd like to invite you to join me in reading the words for giving thanks. From the countless gifts we each have been given, gifts of life and love and sustenance, we bring these small portions to share in the works of love which none of us can accomplish alone.
All right, here's another song for us to sing together. It's Seed of Hope.
There's a seed of hope in my soul, a little seed of hope in my soul. Gonna tend it every day so that it grows strong. Oh, this I pray. Then that seed of hope soon will bloom in my soul. There's a seed of joy in my soul, a little seed of joy in my soul. Gonna tend it every day so that it grows strong. Oh, this I pray. Then that seed of joy soon will bloom in my soul. There's a seed of peace in my soul, a little seed of peace in my soul. Gonna tend it every day so that it grows strong. Oh, this I pray. Then that seed of peace soon will bloom in my soul.
The reading today is from Robin Wall Kimmerer, a mother, a scientist, a decorated professor, and an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, from her text, Braiding Sweetgrass. Knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. Philosophers refer to the state of isolation and disconnection from the natural world as species loneliness, a deep unnamed sadness stemming from estrangement from the rest of creation, from the loss of relationship. As our human dominance of the world has grown, we have become more isolated, more lonely when we can no longer call out to our neighbors. It's no wonder that naming was the first job the Creator gave to the first people.
Good morning, everyone. I guess it's my turn. Thank you so much for inviting me here to share my truth and my experiences as they relate to the summer theme that we are all in this together. So, since returning to Southwest Michigan, I've been working at the Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy, which is the local nonprofit conservation group that protects wild and natural land here in Southwest Michigan. But protect it from what? So sometimes from ourselves. So mostly we protect high quality natural land from development, urban sprawl, or conversion to some other non-natural land use. So this looks like protecting natural places by acquiring them as new nature preserves, or sometimes placing voluntary restrictions on privately owned property to help landowners keep it from being developed. We also protect farms, pastures, orchards, vineyards, wetlands, riverbanks, and other landscapes that are regionally important for local food production, habitat value, or even recreation and open space. So I'm going to screen share here. So this slide that you can see right now is the boundaries of our service area. So we go all the way from the border with Indiana to Lake Michigan, making up the western border, all the way north to Saugatuck, and then across the top of Berry County, and then down south, making up the eastern border along Calhoun and Branch counties. So together, the surface area of all of these places is actually over 5,000 square miles. So of course, we do collaborate with state agencies, other nature groups, tribes, and fellow nonprofits to make conservation happen. We are, of course, by no means alone. And nationally, there's actually about 1,100 land conservancies doing the same type of work across the country. So you may know our work from popular nature preserves such as Portman Nature Preserve in Mattawan or Pilgrim Haven on the beach in South Haven. But there are also many places that go unnoticed in the vastness of that landscape. And my job is, luckily enough, actually to seek those places out. So when I'm not writing grants or writing up legal restrictions for conservation properties, I'm out in this huge green and gorgeous landscape trying to figure out where we should focus our work and where to do our next land conservation project. So occasionally, the vastness of this service area and the admittedly dire need to protect more land can be a bit overwhelming. But over 29 years, we've protected over 17,000 acres. And that sounds like a lot until you put it on the scale of the entire region, of which it's, of course, only a fraction. However, recently, I've taken an entirely new approach to thinking about the landscape, which has helped me reframe my admitted overwhelm with the task at hand. So in the era of a global pandemic, massive social injustice and oppression, a planetary scale extinction event, and climate change, to name just a few, it is really hard to plug away at the corner of the world which we inhabit without feeling demoralized and occasionally inadequate to the task at hand. I've experienced that firsthand, and the remedy has been building resilience in my own life based on landscape and ecology. So I know that the concept of resilience in a personality or as a character trait is not really groundbreaking, but hear me out. So the definition of resilient is able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. To me, that sounds a lot like what I've been trying to do in the COVID era. So we are all trying to be more resilient these days to withstand difficult conditions. But it was when I connected this trait to the landscape on which I work that I found my own resilience most profound and enduring. So on the landscape, the concept of resilience is similar. The Nature Conservancy defines resilient sites as areas of land with sufficient variability and microclimate options to enable species and ecosystems to persist in the face of climate change, and which will maintain this ability over time. So you may be able to instinctively think of places like this. So areas of land that have diverse topography with a healthy variety of native species in their natural communities, that have slightly different temperatures and humidity, perhaps when you walk from the top of a ridge down to the bottom where there might be water. Places like this where water gathers in the dry season to give wildlife a break. Places that have connection to other natural land and that aren't isolated from other green space. So these areas, which we call resilient sites, are the places that can survive the system-wide changes we are seeing today through climate change and extinction. They are the places that will be most stable in the face of this change, and they're the places that give us hope. They're also the places most adaptable to this change. So the concept of resilient sites is actually a relatively new one. In the past, we, And the other nonprofit conservation groups mostly focused on protecting isolated high-quality areas without a ton of thought about how they would survive coming bottleneck events. So protecting resilient areas actually means protecting the areas in our landscape that do the most, both for us and for our more than human kin. So insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds, aquatic invertebrates, and mammals, and more. So if we can protect these resilient places, we protect our own future. That brought my colleagues at the Land Conservancy and I to the question of how to actually find these resilient sites in the landscape, which is what I'm going to show you next. So we used some really fun and kind of fancy geographic modeling software to represent some variables in the landscape. So this is the sciencey part. So biodiversity, water quality, and connectivity. So it would take a lot longer than I have today to really go into why we selected each of these things and the academic underpinnings for each of those variables. But they're really important, and they all contain subvariables such as soil type, slope, proximity to wetlands, habitat functionality, and so on. But the major points here are a diverse native wildlife and plant community, variable topography and landform diversity, access to water resources, often of a few different kinds. And then together, and additionally, the most important thing for a resilient site is all these factors in addition to connectivity with other resilient sites nearby or contiguous. So now I'm going to screen share again and show you what I mean by resilient sites. So this is a map of our whole service area with this concept of resilient sites overlaid on top of it. So it looks like a kaleidoscope, but the blue areas and the green areas are the places that have the highest resilience scores, followed by yellow, then orange, and finally red. So typical rainbow order here. So what stuck out to me is this. And this is the most important finding of this project and probably modern ecology. So the most resilient sites are the ones that have connections to others. And the swaths of blue, which you can see making up areas around the Paw Paw River through the middle of Van Buren County, the Berry State Game Area, which is kind of the whole entirety of Berry County, actually, and the north east corner of Kalamazoo County, Fort Custer State Game Area, and the actual fort. So these are some of these super high quality places, but what's actually most important about them is that they are connected to some other resilient site that is supporting them via a very thin green line, which demarcates a slightly less high quality area, not a reserve of biodiversity, but the blue biodiversity or best sites simply could not exist without those green lifelines. So these connections that are called connectivity or habitat corridors in ecology are so important that our new strategic plan is actually focused on protecting land in between these already high quality places. So the past great hubris of my profession, which was almost entirely white and male conservation field in the 20th century, was that we were focused on protecting these paradise-like isolated parks, setting down subjective borders and fencing it in, then never looking over our shoulder to see what happened beyond the border. For example, who we were fencing out and what relationship there was or had been between different areas in the landscape. But more recently, I think there's a greater shift in learning that we are not separate. We cannot dictate that nature starts on one side of a line and then we are on the other, because these things are connected and not separate. The exact opposite is in fact true. The connections between sites are the most important part of the ecosystem to protect. So to the next slide. So here we go. Here's the really, really intense nerd part. So the primary goal is to foster connection in the landscape by protecting land that buffers and connects existing high quality areas by creating corridors, places where wildlife can move and disperse from one nature preserve or state game area to another. And here's the good science on this slide that really backs this up. So the relatively new concept of habitat connectivity shows that corridors can measurably and repeatably reduce the likelihood of extinction, maintain consistent growth in biodiversity, and increase likelihood of a new native species using the site and dispersing to that site. So these connections are definitely not as glamorous or newsworthy as a new nature preserve, but they are actually the most important thing we can do. Stop screen sharing. Okay. But as I said, we're all in this together. This is not our task alone. So while the Land Conservancy and our partners are busy safeguarding these green and blue connections across the landscape, I will be leaning into the words of Robin Wall Kimmerer that we heard earlier, and I invite you to do so as well. We must forge our own connectivity in this time, learn the names and lifeways of the birds or insects we see, perhaps inviting more native plants into our yard, thereby providing habitat, or even something utterly simple. So a change I've recently made is using they as the pronoun for dandelions, squirrels, potted plants, trees, rivers, etc. It might feel silly at first, but we've been conditioned by grammar textbooks to use the word it to refer to sentient, living, non-human beings. In many other languages and cultures, however, this is unthinkable. It's also one of the first steps of connection and connectivity, acknowledging the shared aliveness and interdependence with our more than human kin. So to close, you will never again be lonely once you acknowledge this connection. Once we have learned the sound of a bird's call, those familiar notes and patterns will thereafter break into our days, remind us of our fellow beings. Eventually, it may feel like hearing the voice of an old friend. So while right now we're alone, mostly indoors, social distancing, the connections and relations of our outdoors are open to all. My intention is to invest in these relations, build connectivity, and reap the resilience that they provide us. Again, in the words of Kimmerer, the land knows you, even when you are lost. I thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts today. We are now going to break into discussion groups as we ponder the following questions. And then don't leave after the discussion group, because after that we will return to the large group for a closing song. But these are the questions. I see they're in the chat as well. How have you been resilient to challenges and change in your lifetime? And interacting with natural lands helps us maintain our own resilience. So which outdoor places have given you solace? And if you're able, please recommend a beautiful place for your co-discussants to visit. So now to the groups.
This should be it.
Here in reverence now we gather for the blessings we have known. With a pledge to one another that we journey not alone. Joy and sorrow make us wise, kin to all that lives and dies. Love calls us on. Love calls us on. Words and deeds of those before us, waken here to keep us strong. Lend our voices in the chorus of creation's living song. Courage bids us lift our eyes upward to the shining skies. Hope calls us on. Hope calls us on. Loyal guides in love and duty, lead us with a trusted light. Blessed are they whose inward beauty shows the path of truth and right. Honor is their earthly prize. By their work we realize faith calls us on. Faith calls us on. Shed a radiant hour. Truth has made us free, and our Spirit's gracious power bring the good that yet shall be. Right the path before us lies. Joyful pilgrims now we rise. Life calls us on. Life calls us on. Life calls
For our closing words, this. Let us go forth into the world through a door of hope for the future, remembering these words by Martin Luther. Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. So may it be with us. And now, as we've been doing with the services, if you want to stick around and have a virtual coffee hour, do so. If you have other things that you need to do, you can leave at this point. And then just a reminder again, the memorial service for Druzy Rose Grant is at 1 p.m. at the same Zoom address. So thank you for attending, and good luck. Be well.